And it did get to the stage where I just thought life was not worth living at all for any of us. And I seriously planned, I don't remember how I did it, how we might all take ourselves off, kill Giles and kill ourselves. My husband felt that this wouldn't be suicide for Giles, it would be murder, and he couldn't go ahead with it.
Welcome back to Crisis What Crisis, the podcast that aims to guide you towards a more resilient life and whatever it might throw at you. If this is your first time with us, then do please hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. It really does help make sure that these, I hope, useful conversations are shared as widely as possible. I'm joined today by the remarkable Dame Stephanie Shirley, tech pioneer, entrepreneur, philanthropist. Having arrived in Britain as a 5-year-old refugee fleeing Nazi Germany on the Kindertransport, Dame Stephanie went on to break through the glass ceiling of a male-dominated computer industry. She built one of Britain's most successful software companies, which also prioritised flexible work for women, and grew it to a staggering valuation of almost $3 billion, making 70 of her staff millionaires along the way. But her impact goes far beyond the business world. Dame Stephanie has dedicated the last 3 decades of her life to philanthropy, giving away most of her personal wealth along the way. Once the 11th wealthiest woman in the UK, she is the only person to drop off the Sunday Times rich list due to generosity. Inspired by her late son Giles, who was profoundly autistic, Dame Stephanie founded the Priors Court School and Kingwood Trust, transforming education and care for those with autism. Her Shirley Foundation has funded countless initiatives in autism research, education and the arts. She became a member of the Order of the Companions of Honour in 2017. Dame Stephanie has faced moments that would break many, but she pushed through and on with incredible resilience, innovation, and a determination to make a difference. A former podcast guest of ours, Baroness Martha Lane Fox, wrote the foreword to Dame Stephanie's brilliant memoir, Let It Go, and described her as a role model for how to build your life, not just your company. Dame Stephanie, welcome to Crisis What Crisis. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm really raring to go.
Ah, wonderful. Well, we're so pleased to have you here. Dame Stephanie, as we begin, I should point out that you are better known to many as Steve Shirley. I know this is a story that you have told many times, but if you don't mind, can I ask you please just to quickly explain why that is, how that is?
Delighted. I date from the days, Andy, when women were not expected to run a serious business. And when I wrote letters, and they were letters in those days, to prospective clients, they received absolutely no response whatsoever. And I was mailing them out at about 8, 9, 10 a week, having done a bit of research as to who I was writing to. But my husband actually suggested that the lack of response was due to my name, that they saw it came from a woman and that they weren't interested. So he said, write the same letters, but call yourself Steve, which is the family nickname. And Andy, surprise, surprise, it did actually work. I began to get some responses, began to get some interviews, and I had a good story to tell. So I began to get some work.
Well, Steve, if I may now, from this point on, with your permission, this conversation is about sharing, your lessons in resilience. So there's the first. If you hit an obstacle, take control, think differently.
I think I'm always a glass half full type of person anyway. So I do see the good side of situations. Problems are learning opportunities. I think you learn more from your failures and your disasters and your crises than you do for when things are running smoothly.
Steve, the story of your arrival in Britain from Austria with your sister, the separation from your mother and father and the impact that it had on you is, in and of itself, another lesson in resilience. Those early years of your life in Britain, in the West Midlands, though you were we should explain that you were very well taken care of by your effective foster parents to whom you became extremely close, were obviously very difficult. And they took a significant toll on your mental health as a young woman. You've described it as feelings of abandonment, which led to depression, and as you describe it, at one stage, survivor's guilt. Can you tell me a little about your state of mind at that stage of your life and how you found your way through?
I think I was more confused than anything else. With young children, we hadn't been told what was going to happen. We were just saying we were going away. Nobody said we were going away on a holiday or anything, but they tried to explain you're going to live with another family and make that acceptable. My mother was a very insightful woman, and she'd made little presents for us, both my sister and I, so that we were only allowed to open the presents when the train had started. So that got us through that particular traumatic experience. I remember leaving Vienna because our parents, and there was obviously a station full of them, were not only crying, but they were sort of wailing, a noise I've never heard in any other situation. And it may be something Jewish, but it really was eerie and memorable. People remembered entrepreneurs like me for our successes, but in fact, I'm much more proud of how I dealt with the failures. Confusion, I'd lost my family, I'd lost the language, I'd lost my nationality, that didn't mean very much. Strange food, strange people, strange cultures. And I was very lucky to be with my older sister, so that helped a bit. But my foster parents, bless them, did not speak German. I did not speak English. My father had taught us some useful phrases so that I could say things like, and I joke, slow combustion stove and vine screen Viper, but I didn't know how to ask to go to the bathroom. So it was pretty awful. 1,000 children on a train with just 2 adults. There were also some young girls who helped, sort of 16 plus, so not eligible to come out. And these trains ran from Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and the free city of Danzig. And it was the one crisis that has impacted my life. It still impacts it. I had what is called survivor guilt, where illogically you feel guilty for having survived when so many people died. The neighbours of my foster parents, for some extraordinary reason, they should have known better, kept saying to me, "Aren't you lucky to be saved? Aren't you lucky to be saved?" Saved from the Nazi era, of course. That's not a healthy thing to say to a 5, 6-year-old. So I did suffer from really awful depressions. And I was lucky in that a lover introduced me to the Tavistock Clinic in London, where I had an analyst for 6 years to get me out of those stages. It has driven my life. I still feel that I need to make sure that the life that was saved was worth saving. And so I try not to fritter my time away. I do silly things, of course I do, but in general, I'm a very serious person.
That intervention, that took you to the Tavistock Clinic, was obviously an absolutely key moment in your life. It also manifested in ambition, am I right? The fire that's inside you that got lit as an entrepreneur a little bit later in your life.
I think when you have a crisis, you react in different ways. You can dissolve into pain, into sorrow, into suicidal thoughts, and even perhaps to death. Or you can respond in a positive way and make something worthwhile out of a bad situation. And that's what I've always tried to do. I tend not to have regrets looking back because I always do the very best I can, really trying to make sure that I'm prepared for something, that I've done this study, that I've practiced it well, that I can really, so I don't, whether it's a failure or a success, I don't look back and sort of say, I wish I'd done so and so. That's what happened. And I make the best of it. And that positivity has held me in good stead. There are different sorts of crises, though. I felt after, arriving in England as a refugee, you'd think that would be enough for my life, but I did have another major crisis of a completely different sort, plus some minor crises, of course, in that I think my late son was profoundly autistic.
Yes.
And that put an enormous stress on the family, on the marriage, on my life, on my professional life as well. That crisis couldn't be resolved. Eventually, it had got to a question of it was Giles or me who was going to finish up in hospital. And so Giles went into hospital and stayed there for 13 years, which is such a tragic thing to happen to your firstborn, your child, your only child, because we decided not to have any more. I cannot imagine a crisis worse. It really changed me, not necessarily for the worse, because before I had Giles, I was quite an intellectual snob, Andy. I really so respected intellect that I looked down on people of lower intelligence. And that, of course, once you have your own learning disabled child, quickly goes away, and you learn a love for people, irrespective of their capabilities. And I think it's made me a much warmer and a nicer person.
And I just think that is remarkable. We say this often, actually, that, when we're talking about finding opportunity in crisis, I often add the caveat, sort of serious illness aside. And in your case, this is not. It's worse than that. It's the serious illness of your son Giles, which any parent will immediately understand is considerably worse than falling ill yourself. The idea that your child is struggling in the way that Giles did so profoundly, and yet what you've just described to us is absolutely finding a positive in amongst all of that.
I'm now a very happy person. I've found a purpose in life post my business life. I retired at 60, and since then I've concentrated on giving away my self-made wealth, and that has taken me to new people, new activities, very, very positive, always feeling that I am making a difference or trying to make a positive difference. And I can't imagine now what would have happened had Giles been so-called normal, because what would my life have been like now? Would I have turned into a lady who lunches? But as it is, I have a full, very busy life, interacting and trying to influence the autistic world.
I feel that we should add a little bit of detail here, just so the listener or the viewer sort of can understand the full context. Your son Giles was born in 1963, I think. Seemingly healthy. Yes. Baby. It's a while, actually, I think sort of 2.5 years before you realise that his struggles at that age are autism, are diagnosed, and he is diagnosed with autism, profound autism.
Well, up to then, he'd been developing reasonably well. I knew he was slow. I knew he was learning disabled. But at 2.5, he lost the speech that he had already acquired. And the bad times really began because he lost capability and slipped back.
Traumatic, obviously, for him, for you, for Derek, your husband. And compounded, I think I'm right in saying, when you discovered, because Giles, your journey with Giles in terms of how to help him, both in terms of where he would spend his days. You went through a number of different facilities, I think, and schools. But in one of those, you discovered that he was being hit. being struck by one of his carers, and that is the moment when you decide this is, I've got to take total control of this. He can't be in a place like that, and that lays the ground, of course, for some of the astonishing work that you've done for others with autism.
When you have a child that is what is euphemistically called pre-speech, in other words, without speech, it is so difficult to learn to communicate with them without speech, and that's what you have to learn to do. But I think the love that one has for a vulnerable child is probably of a different character and different depth to other children. Not that I have other children, but I cannot imagine anything stronger. My husband died a couple of years ago, and I'm very conscious that while I mourn his passing, it is nothing like the loss of Giles, where I really, broke down again and could hardly face life.
You used the phrase suicidal thoughts earlier in the conversation, and I know that you've talked before about the sort of pressure, the strain that was being applied to you and Derek, and you considered a pact, a suicide pact. You felt that there was no way through this, there was no way out. Derek, thankfully, felt differently. Could you just give us an idea of the, as I say, the intolerable pressure that you were under that would lead you to that kind of thought?
Yes, I think if the same happened to me today, I would be able to alleviate things by buying professional help. But at that time, we were living on a very modest income, and there was no question of having paid help with Giles. And it did get to the stage where I just thought life was not worth living at all for any of us. I couldn't see any future of it. I'd tried different things. I'd struggled to get a decent schooling for him. And there was one day when obviously things had gone very badly wrong, and I seriously planned, I can remember how I did it, how we might all take ourselves off, kill Giles and kill ourselves. Luckily, I suppose, my husband felt that this wouldn't be suicide for Giles, it would be murder, and he couldn't go ahead with it. And I say luckily because since then my life has turned the corner. I am a very happy person. I lead a very full but contented life. It's not perfect, of course it isn't, but I wouldn't go back.
And you see that, Steve, as the turning point, that discussion with Derek, with your husband, was the beginning of that new life.
Yes, I think it made me realise that I was not Superwoman, that I really had to learn how to accept help. I used to feel I really had to show a strong mind. And when I had Giles and realised how serious all this was, the impact it was going to have on my life, I got lost in this. Why me? I've had enough in my life. It's not fair. Why me? And then, of course, as you mature and you assimilate what's going on, you realise, well, why not me? And I have the strength to cope with it, whereas perhaps others wouldn't. Some people sentimentally say that God, and I don't believe in a God, but they say that God doesn't give you problems that you're not capable of solving. And it's quite a nice concept. But that why me and why not me, I think, is an important one.
Much of what you've described, and I'm interested that you say that religion hasn't played a part in your life, it would be described now as a sort of modern stoicism. Would you describe yourself as a stoic? Certainly,
yes, I would.
Certainly the central piece of control is stoicism. You would describe yourself as a stoic?
Yes.
And what is stoicism to you?
Plowing on despite problems.
So you found a route out or a route forward for yourself, and you found a route forward for Giles, because determined that he shouldn't live his life in a hospital environment. Later, of course, but in 1994, I think you found a Kingwood, a residential home for autistic people. I think it's now known as Autism at Kingwood. And Giles was the first resident, is that correct?
The first resident and the first home of that first charity that I set up. It now looks after about 150 people with the same sorts of difficulties as Giles, all autistic, living quiet lives in the community.
It's just remarkable, Steve, and it's just one example. It is a very important example, but it's just one example of your ability not just to try and navigate a difficulty, overcome an obstacle, move forward with your life, but you just see it in such a sort of epic fashion. You're earlier in your life, we haven't got into it in too much detail, but those early struggles in your career when you hit the glass ceiling, the solution to that, I'm going to start a business. These difficulties which is a highly unusual route for a woman of your age and at that time. And here we have obviously a problem of a much more personal nature. Your solution, I'm going to go and build a school. What is it about you, Steve, that creates that kind of ambition and not just that ability to deliver? All of these things we're talking about, and I've only given 2 examples here, are deeply complicated enterprises. Your business was not a straightforward business in many ways, and a very complicated field of work in computing software. And building a school is no one's idea of a straightforward project. What is it about you that allows you to see the vision and deliver?
I think it's general cussedness. I don't like being laughed at, so I'm determined to make it happen. That stands me in good stead.
So a stubbornness.
There's a stubbornness. People talk about resilience, but I think it's stubbornness. I just don't want to be found less than capable.
Let's talk about the business then in a little bit more detail, because running in parallel with all of these changes that we've just touched on in your personal life with Giles is the incredible growth of your business. These 2 paths that you're following. You've explained how the Giles situation developed and was in the end led to you're finding a route through both for you and him. But how were you managing those 2 things that were going on for a number of years in your life, quite a number of years in your life?
Well, many people have, in fact, asked how I coped with two things, each of which is considered to be all-consuming. But in fact, I'm a workaholic. The only time I forgot work was when I was with Giles. And the only time I forgot Giles was when I was at work. So for many, many years, the 2 sicknesses balanced each other out. But I was acting as Superwoman, and eventually I cracked up and had a breakdown and learnt that bitter lesson that I had to get help, and I had to learn to say, I can't do this.
The importance of therapy then in your life has been, for someone so stubborn, has been obviously been key. Can you give me your view? I think
I'd be dead without that therapy. It was very good. I think it was good. I'd got the right sort of person. Apparently a Jungian, I don't think you can use that word, but a therapist who believed in the principles of the psychologist Jung.
Yes, and that was the basis of your early therapy at the Tavistock. And that's that approach has stayed constant for you?
I would say, well, I do say I'm a happy person now, and I have been now for some years. Even though, I'm sad about the loss of my husband, for example, but I'm sad. I'm not depressed. I'm not mentally ill. I'm on antidepressants as it happens because I am a bit sad. But life goes on. I have dealt with the death of my husband, who we were married for 62 years, so it was quite a loss. But I'm still coping.
Well, I'm sorry for that loss, and what a remarkable life you had together. You've touched on Derek a number of times during the course of the conversation, and I
think I was lucky to find somebody in those days who was prepared to put up with a woman leading such an emancipated life as I have had. Life is very precious. Life is precious to me. It's precious for other people as well. The importance of nurturing talent, nurturing life is all consuming with me. That's what I do. I try and help. I try and think. I try and improve myself. It's a strange sort of life, that it all comes from the negatives of being a refugee. I'm sure that is still the most important thread in my life. Once a refugee, always a refugee, and sadly that is true.
Your approach to problem solving, your professional life, we've discussed it in regards to your, what was going on at home, every day filled with different problems of one kind or another, some of them more important than some others. How do I summarise your approach? If indeed you agree that, essentially being a human being is about, problem solving of one kind or another.
I'm always looking to try and balance things. Yes, this has happened, but also don't forget such and such. So I try to be realistic about how wonderful my life is, and not just concentrate on the bad bits. I've moved forward, I've moved on. I'm a very different person now to how I was before Giles was born. And as I say, I think I'm a better person. I often wonder where my workaholism comes from. And I think it comes from the negative as well. My mother, with whom I did not get on very well, always called me, not always, but called me stupid and immature. And I knew this. And I think I've always tried to counterbalance that by working that much harder, by getting that much further in my endeavours, because I was not going to finish up as a stupid person.
You had a complicated relationship with your birth mother because she came to England after...
Yes,
she came to England before the end of the war, and which is something I didn't fully appreciate because this history does get lost and it's a gap in my knowledge. But that coming here into England, you'd automatically assume that she would be reunited with you. But it really wasn't that straightforward. She was under curfew as a refugee, so she couldn't move far, and she certainly couldn't earn enough money to be able to keep you. So as a child, your mother was in the country, actually not living not that far from you, but you were still with your foster parents and not with her, and that in some ways led to the breaking of the bond between you. I think I'm correct in saying.
Yes, my sister was quite different. She was close to my mother, and lived with her for a certain stage as a child. That was when my mother could have one child living with her and chose the older child, which surprised some people. But I was happily settled with auntie and uncle, as I called them. And so it seemed quite logical for her to take the child that hadn't adapted well to England. At the end of the war, when we were 18, we had the opportunity to take British nationality. And I leapt at the chance. It was just what I wanted. I feel more English than the English, and I'm very, very happy to go in for naturalisation. But my sister, 4 years older, didn't react in the same way. She didn't feel that she wanted to become British, so she declined. And 6 months later, another letter came from the Home Office, again offering, you've been to school here, you've settled in this country, do you want to apply for British citizenship, which would be favourably received? And again, she said no. And then a third letter came with a slightly different tone to it, saying, if she didn't want to take British nationality, having lived here for 20 odd years, she should go back to where she came from.
Goodness.
And they put it in a much more nicer way. So that was that. But then she upped sticks and took herself off to Australia, and on a £10 assisted POM. And within 6 months, applied for Australian citizenship. And thinking about it, I realised that she chose to go to Australia. We didn't choose to come to this country. We were sent, we were put on a train. We just didn't know we were going into the arms of strangers in a strange country, very strange country. They take milk in their tea, for instance.
But Steve, here we are. It's another example of what we touched on earlier. You know, a lot of people would have looked at that. Let's just take the relationship with your mother, the breaking of that bond, the circumstances around it, or maybe not even that. Maybe just frankly the attitude of your mother that you touched on there. A mother telling a child that they're stupid. A lot of people, I think, would look at those kind of moments in life and only see that as a block, only see that as a reason not to succeed, only see that as a reason as to why life isn't going the way it should go. And you, again, it's another example. You have taken the opposite view. You have put those thoughts to productive work.
Yeah, I think it's this term self-efficacy, that I have the strength to make my own future, that I'm not a pawn in somebody else's grand plan. I can make the future happen.
That you have control.
I have control.
Let's talk about the business some more. Of the first 300 employees in your company, Steve, 297 were women. A radical and unheard of choice at the time. You had hundreds, thousands of women, all coding, all working from home on, it's very significant tasks like, building the black box programming for Concorde. A very sort of innovative, pioneering, significant business. I've heard you say that you don't consider yourself a feminist. Yet your actions have obviously so profoundly advanced opportunities for women. How do you reconcile that?
For one thing, in the 50s, when I really started as a mature person, feminism was very anti-male, which I assure you I am not. But also I'm much more interested in supporting the underdog. I want the loser to win. So it's the minority. While women behave as a minority, I would support them, but I also support other minorities. I'm very keen on an inclusive society, learning how to deal with people of different cultures, different sexual orientation, different training.
You said, Steve, that it wasn't until your mid-50s that you felt financial freedom, when you began to realise or felt that you had made it. You said that sort of imposter syndrome, which obviously we've touched on a fair bit in other conversations on this podcast, has been a factor. When did you conquer that obstacle? When did the imposter syndrome fall away? And indeed, has it entirely?
I'm not sure that it has fallen away, and that I still struggle. Is this good enough? Should I rewrite this? Has this got the right tone? Am I quick enough in my response? All things that are questioning my own competence. So I'd say it hasn't really gone away. Maybe it never will. Would
you say that you're still hard on yourself, then?
Oh yes.
The internal commentary.
I'm the strictest critic I could possibly have.
Because obviously anyone listening to this, watching this now, would just be, I'm very confident of this, just so in awe of you. And to hear that the voice in your head is saying, come on, and then you're sitting here now, razor sharp at 91. No, I must do more. I mean, it is the ultimate lesson, Steve, if you don't mind me saying so, for how to live your life.
Well, I hope it's helpful to other people.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I want to talk a little bit more about your philanthropy, if I may. You retired in 1993, although let's we use the word retired. I'm not sure it's the right word, Steve. I'm not sure you ever stopped. But you retired, I suppose, from the full-time role that you had in '93 to dedicate yourself fully to philanthropy. You lost Giles, and he was just 35 years old in 1998, which was, as you've told us, was utterly devastating. But you decided at that point that your life then would be all about philanthropy, advocating for autism, but also for women in tech, for education, arts, a whole range of different causes. Just if you can, just talk to me about the decision that you made that the rest of your life would be essentially about giving of yourself, your time, your expertise, your brilliance, and giving away your money. I'm guessing that was a gradual process, or am I wrong? Was that a very clear, distinct decision at that stage in your life?
It was a very business-like decision. I decided to concentrate on the things that I knew and cared about, and there were really only two: autism, my son's condition, and information technology, which I love. And it's my professional discipline, and I wish I were more up to date with it today. Trying to get a balance between the many, many things that I've been given and what I can give back and give forward. Rather than give back, you give forward. Somebody helped me as a child, I will help other children. I'm a strong advocate, not just for Giles, but for all autistic people. And that's been, for years now. I was the initial funder of the Oxford Internet Institute, which is the year 2000, and the focus is not on the technology of the internet, but on the social, economic, legal, and ethical issues that are brought into society. I find that opportunity to move the technology on so late in my career very exciting. I'm thrilled at what the Oxford Internet is doing in the way of positive thinking as to how the internet can be used.
Steve, to hear you say that with such enthusiasm, you had a seat in the front row of the sort of birth of computing, out of the Second World War. To still have that level of enthusiasm is another lesson for us all. Can I ask, at one point, as I touched on in the intro, you were the 11th wealthiest woman in the UK. You were 3 spots down from the Queen on the rich list. And as I also explained, you were the first to fall off due to philanthropy. I mean, it's a superficial question in a way, but what's your relationship with money? Because most people wouldn't do that, Steve. Most people would not make a decision to take themselves off the rich list, having worked as hard as you have, having accomplished everything that you had. You're entirely deserving of all of that money, and yet you decided to follow another path. What is your relationship with wealth?
I believe money, for me, is equivalent to choice. I can choose what I do with my life, and it gives me great freedom. I don't do many of the things that other wealthy people do. I don't have a yacht. I don't travel around the world. I concentrate on what I want to do, and I choose to actually learn to give my money away wisely. It's not as easy as you'd think.
Your TED talk that you gave 9 years ago, it is, I'm not going to go into it in great detail because I want people to go and discover it for themselves, but it is a masterclass in absolute masterclass in public speaking. And in the course of that, not only is it moving, it's informative, it is also very funny. And one of your lines that I will preview is that women such as yourself have a flatter head than most, and the reason for that is the amount of pats that you've had that you've had on your head delivered by less worthy men. There are other lines. Go and find that TED Talk, because it is, I promise you, it's one of the best ones I've seen. It's absolutely superb. Steve, your memoir that was published a little while ago, Let It Go, is a remarkable book. I've asked people to go and watch your TED Talk. I would also urge them to go and buy your book. One of the remarkable things about it is just the way in which you tell the story of your life. Because it is, as we've been touching on during the course of this conversation, full of crisis. Your life has been full of crisis, it's been full of success. The matter-of-fact way in which you describe the events and the thought process that then takes you out of the darker moments is remarkable. It's beautifully written. I'm going to ask you the question: were you happy with it?
Yes, and people find it inspirational, which pleases me. I dictated it. Richard Asquith, who was a fine journalist, whom I had selected because he was one of the few people who understood what I was doing when I took my company into co-ownership. He knocked it into shape, but I'm very pleased with it. It's been translated into German and into Spanish, so it has quite a readership.
It's a wonderful piece of work. It really is. Dame Stephanie Shirley, Steve, if I may, there is no doubt that you've shown that yours was a life worth saving. I think it is, as your friend Martha Lane Fox has said, it is a proper inspiration to us all on how to live our lives. And I thank you for your time today.
It's been a great pleasure.
If you've enjoyed this conversation, then please do leave us a review. And if you found it helpful or even inspiring, we would be delighted if you recommended us to your friends. It means an awful lot if you do. You can watch the full episodes on YouTube, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and if you hit subscribe, you'll find a lot more Crisis Conversations. As always, full transcripts are available on our website, along with links. Just head to crisiswhatcrisis.com, and thank you so much for listening.